Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek along with Crashlet Collier. Ethan Inman not feeling well. I mean, he's feeling good about beating UCLA, but he's just not feeling well, under the weather. And of course, it's the holidays. We want to be healthy heading into Christmas. So Ethan just needs to get better, send some prayers his way. So it's Crash and myself for, hey, this is our final Sunday post-game show of the season. We wrap up UCLA. There's no game this coming weekend. That's it for USC until the bowl game. And, of course, next week we find out what the Trojans' bowl game is. And, of course, we come at you every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, 10 p.m. in the East, here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. All right, so, Crash, your general impressions of the UCLA game. We'll dive into the details. We'll go into the nuances of it, but let's just start with your overview of this game.
Well, Matt, I think it was once again, and I know I've been saying this a lot over the past month, it was another tale of two halves game for USC. We once again saw USC start off very slow, and I think maybe part of that was, I think maybe in part UCLA did have a bit more of a spark than we thought, given Nico Iamaleava did end up playing, even though we both thought that he wouldn't, given his recent injury history, especially over the past few weeks with the Bruins. But after the second half, I thought USC really cleaned it up and played a lot better. And especially, too, I think, I'm not sure what the suspensions were about for Makai Lemon or Jacoby Lane. I think broke some team rule or something is what it sounded like, according to Lincoln Riley. But I think once they got in, they were doing better. I think just the offense then just got rolling and was able to take over. But it definitely got a little nerve-wracking at times in that first half. Could UCLA run away with it? Were they going to carry the momentum from that first half into the second half? But I was really impressed with how USC just stood their ground, turned it on offensively, and just stood up to UCLA when they were on defense.
All right, so, one of the obvious things that a lot of USC fans were talking about during the game is, this was a 14-10 game in the fourth quarter. UCLA is a bad team, and UCLA made the kinds of mistakes that bad teams make. And, USC needed a little bit of help. Now, credit the Trojans. When they received help, they cashed it in. Like when UCLA dropped that pass in USC territory, down 14-10, early fourth quarter, had to punt. And then USC gets the ball, and then UCLA pass interference, roughing the passer. It was 21-10 in a hurry, and USC used those mistakes to pull away. So, they cashed in UCLA's errors. But really, Lincoln Riley, really everybody needed a little help from UCLA in the fourth quarter to finally pull away and feel comfortable. That's a big talking point, Crash, coming out of this game. Where do you come down on it?
I think definitely it's one where it just looks at I think that USC is definitely trending in the right direction. I think at least just kind of the year over year just build of the program. You got to give USC credit. I think they're moving in the right direction in general, but kind of like you said, just needing help from a team like UCLA who has not been very good this year. And they had their 3-week moment of glory, but that has come and gone, and that is not where we are right now. But I think where USC is, if you're trying to prove, hey, we're on that next level, we're getting better, we're going to be in the CFP next year, you got to be able to capitalize and just be able to really dominate those good teams and not be not just obviously taking advantage of their mistakes, but also, being able to score points, manufacture plays, and also stand up to them on defense and bully them around, and not just be needing to rely on just their mistakes to help you win.
Well, when we consider the state of the USC program now, Crash, you think it's headed on the right direction? I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not as optimistic. Let's put it that way, because USC has to play Ohio State and Indiana next year. The Big Ten schedule is going to get tougher. If this is a representative example, and obviously we're expecting improvement and evolution next season, but if this is anything close to the standard, USC's in trouble next year. So I'm just going to assume, Crash, that you're banking on significant across-the-board improvement from this team, and with the youth on this team, also the injuries that that your forecast is really, baking in the expectation of, hey, the bar is going to be significantly raised this season. Where are you particularly optimistic for USC being able to raise the bar by a lot, not just a little? It's going to take a lot to be competitive with next year's Big Ten schedule, which is going to be a lot tougher than this one.
For sure, Matt. I think regardless of who's at quarterback, I got a lot of optimism there, whether it's Jade Mayava or Hassan Longstreet if he ends up coming in. And I think, especially, we talked to Cody Kessler last week. I remember I asked him about that, and he seems to also have a lot of optimism in that. A great bonus cut.
Yeah, that's a bonus cut. We talked to Cody Kessler. You need to check it out. It's on our front page, and you'll see the marking of the video bonus. So that's for members. So good pitch, Crash.
But yeah, but just when I asked Cody about that, as someone who really nerds out over, and I mean that in the best way, it's just what the guy does. He nerds out over that stuff. I saw that firsthand when I was interning for him last year at USC. He was just saying, like, Hassan Longstreet's got all the potential to be really good. And then the same with Jade Mayava, too, should he come back. And I'm confident Mayava will continue to get better. But then also, I think the one thing a lot of people do point to as well is they do have that number one recruiting class coming in. And while obviously you can't bank on all freshmen coming in, I think you can also trust that there are going to be some playmakers who are going to come in right away and definitely make an impact, especially if Makai Lemon is probably gone. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Jacoby Lane also declares for the NFL draft. So you got to factor in that. But then I think with, Trumaine Carroll now in the system for a year, he'll get bad. He'll be able to implement his whole system this whole offseason. So I think there's going to be better progress on that front. And then with Chad Bowden also being here, I think USC is going to be able to really, be able to really be intentional and strategic, not just with recruiting, but also in the transfer portal this offseason too. So I think with just a lot of the changes a lot of the things that are either changed or implemented over this past offseason or even during the season, I think are going to start to come into play. And I think that's why I'm kind of feeling optimistic for next year, Matt.
All right. And we're going to talk about next year as we go along here. But first, let's, this is a post-game show, so we do want to just dive into the UCLA game and how it unfolded. I'm thinking that in addition to firing Rob Ryan, I'm thinking that the special teams coach also needs to be fired. We had a blocked field goal here. I mean, Sayeri, he slipped up. It wasn't his best game, but he's been really, really good for this team over the course of the season. So this is not about him. It's more about the blocked field goal, protection breakdown. Like, we can't have these things happening on a semi-regular basis. Big, key, conspicuous failures against Notre Dame, Oregon, UCLA, three of the most important games on the schedule. Like, USC cannot afford to carry dead weight and mediocrity on its coaching staff. I'm thinking special teams position needs a change. What do you think?
Well, Matt, last week I remember we addressed this issue on the Oregon postgame live, and I was willing to give Dudery a bit more of a chance. I think because that was that's not to say they weren't obviously like blown plays with the special teams, but just these last 2 weeks have been pretty bad. And I'm wondering, is that somewhere where you make a change, especially considering it's probably not a very expensive change relative to some of the other changes. So I think it's one where, I was trying to hold out hope and hope maybe things go better, but I just think that especially the blocked field goal, that cannot be happening. So I think that's one where I'm starting to come around where I think there may need to be a change made there.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the defense. We'll get to the offense later, but the defense, it was another case of halftime adjustments from Danton Lynn. Nico Iamaleava was running, he was scrambling for first downs. He had USC off balance. They plugged up the running lanes in the third quarter. They forced him to win the game from the pocket. Clear adjustment. Players finally executed. So Crash, the ability to make halftime adjustments, that's really good because, we all remember Clay Helton. We wish we didn't, but we do. And that coaching staff couldn't coach its way out of a wet paper bag at halftime. and the third quarter was usually a disaster for USC. This time under Danton Lynn, things get fixed, things get improved in the third quarter. That's really good. But the obvious question is, why can't we do this in the first quarter? Why can't we do this in the second quarter? It's the two sides of the coin. It's good that things eventually do get fixed at halftime, but those first 30 minutes are a bumpy ride. We've lived through this before. We lived through it one more time against UCLA. Where are you mentally in terms of living with this Jekyll and Hyde identity?
Well, I think against teams of like the caliber we saw UCLA, Northwestern, Iowa, where we've seen this tale of two halves games most of the month, you can kind of get away with it because those teams aren't as good as you. So as long as USC is making the correct adjustments, it doesn't really hurt them because of that. But against the better teams, against the Oregons, the Notre Dames, teams where you find yourself behind early, that's probably not going to work as well. So while I do like that they're able to adjust well, and that's not to say that you can't and should not be making halftime adjustments, regardless whether you're winning or losing or who you're playing. You also need to know that you got to start out strong and be really coming out really smart and strategic, so that way you're able to keep pace when you do face those better opponents, or you're up ahead and taking care of business. And in some of those games where you can have it put away by halftime, even against weaker opponents. So really that's kind of where I stand on it, where it's more, I just want to see more consistency for when USC has to play those better teams, which will be like the Ohio States, the Indianas next year.
Yeah, USC will not be able to play a slow, sleepy first half and get away with it against the Buckeyes, probably not against Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers as well. So it's a growth point, but it is good that things did get fixed eventually. Half times, third quarters, fourth quarters, USC obviously a lot sharper on defense against UCLA than it was in the first half, and especially that second quarter. Another object of concern for the USC defense, and of course, there's a bowl game, but I don't think any of us are going to feel that our lives are going to be dramatically reshaped by an Alamo Bowl game against Houston or whomever USC plays. The focus really is on 2026. It took 2.5 quarters for USC's defensive line to finally get home and sack Nico Iamaleava. Sometimes they just weren't getting there. Other times Nico slipped away. Talk about just the struggle to wrestle down a mobile quarterback, because this goes back to the beginning of the season against Missouri State. Mobile quarterbacks were slippery for this defensive line, and in the final game of the season, still happening. So to me, the defensive line is the most important unit for 2026. On Tuesday night, we'll get more into the transfer portal and off-season transactions, but just seeing this game against UCLA, they eventually did hammer Nico in the second half, but they weren't really sharp with their instincts in the first half. How much of a concern do you have for this particular position group on the USC roster?
Well, they've definitely been seeming like it's been hit or miss, Matt. And I do want to give Nico Iamaleava credit because he is clearly a very talented quarterback, got a lot of just natural God-given talent that I think you do have to factor in and give him credit for. Like, if he was still at Tennessee, obviously, I don't think he'd probably be putting up great numbers, and I think he's still better than Joey Aguilar in talent alone. But Aguilar looks better because he's playing with Tennessee, the room that Tennessee's got. But I think with Iamaleava, because he's so mobile, it allows him to kind of be very slippery. And I get that can be a challenge regardless of who it is. And it sounded like, especially considering he's UCLA's lead rusher, as well as, obviously leading them in passing yards. But I do think at the same time, USC's got to be able to, get to the quarterback. And especially when it's not a guy like Iamaleava, like you talk about Missouri State, that quarterback being a bit little slippery too, is kind of a cause for concern for when you do face a guy who's got the talent and legs like Iamaleava. So I really think that this unit is going to be very important because you're going to have to stop some very a lot of mobile quarterbacks, and especially like Cody was saying when we talked to him last week, kind of you have to now be a dual threat quarterback. And if you're on the defensive line, you got to be able to stop those guys if you want to win games.
Now, in this UCLA game, staying with the defense, a lot of quick passes, right? And the game plan was very obvious for UCLA. And, hey, I said on the preview show, I would be stunned. That was the word I used, stunned. I'm not going to back away from it. So, hey, I was really wrong. I did not think Nico Iamaleava would play. He had neck spasms. He's suffered multiple injuries. I didn't think it was terribly responsible for UCLA to put him in. Glad he didn't suffer any significant injuries in this game. So he played, and like he showed, he's a tough customer, and he, is also elusive, as you mentioned, Crash. But, UCLA wanted to make sure that Nico did not get hit, if at all possible. That they wanted to save his body, and that you do that by having quick, short passes that take some of the sting out of the USC pass rush. I mean, there were some slow developing passes on 3rd and long, but on non-3rd and long, non-obvious passing situations, UCLA just wore out the flats. Really short flat passes, swing passes, just easy, high percentage throws. You could call them extended handoffs. So it wasn't the kind of game in which the secondary was tested down the field, because UCLA wasn't trying to throw the ball down the field. UCLA was trying to make the game manageable for Nico, throwing the ball in small chunks. I think the secondary did a pretty good job of, wrapping up in space, not giving up a lot of yards after the catch. They really did contain the field, and they kept plays in front of them. I think it was a really good showing for this back line of the USC defense, Crash.
I agree, Matt. I think that's room I know we were kind of critical of them earlier in the year, but I feel like they've seem to have sort of steadied out and stabled out a bit, where they've seemed to be playing better. So I was definitely, like you said, really impressed with just how they've looked, and we're just, really taking advantage of the fact that UCLA was running a very, limited game plan that wasn't, very kind of, I don't know what the right word for it is, but it's like kind of maybe crazy or chaotic, where it's like, or no, creative is the word I was looking for. It's like not too creative. It was simple for like the reasons you mentioned, probably regarding Iamaleava's health and well-being. So I think it was smart to see them really be able to go out and execute something that was pretty simple in kind of how it looked and how UCLA was trying to run its offense.
Let's talk about the USC offense. We talked about the defense. Let's now shift to the offense. Another solid game for this offensive line. And, the final stats weren't spectacular, but, just very consistently, this offensive line has provided good pass protection for Jayden Maiava all season long. And that continued against UCLA, was able to spring King Miller at times. I mean, it wasn't a masterpiece, but it was just a solid, workmanlike performance, Crash. And I think one thing that really needs to be said about this USC offensive line, not just that it's been dealing with injuries and reshuffled combinations every week. Shotgun Spratley mentioned that USC's gone through at least 7 different major starting offensive line combinations, something to that effect. You all know Shotgun. He tweeted something to that effect. You can find that tweet without too much of a problem. But I'm just struck, Crash, and everyone here watching at the Voice of College Football, that we talk about ceilings with teams and with groups, how high their potential is. With this USC offensive line, I'm struck by how high the floor has been. Even on their worst game, their worst night, they're still not bad. Their worst game would maybe be like a C+ or a B-, and they've turned in a lot of B+ and A- type performances, Crash. Just the consistency of this unit. You say you want consistency on defense. Well, this offensive line was a genuinely consistent unit for USC under Zach Hansen.
I agree, Matt. I think the only time I was ever really too critical of them was when Jeanray Reed first got thrown into the fire. Granted, it was, him first really getting meaningful playing time against Illinois after Killian O'Connor got injured for the first time this season. And yeah, I obviously had the bad snap, ran too far down and wiped out the trick play from Jade Maiava and Makai Lemon against the Illini. But since then, he's been much more consistent. And that goes for everyone else, especially with O'Connor and Elijah Page going out multiple times this season. So I really have been impressed with just how well they've just played, especially like I've said before, and having talked to Justin Dietich about this on my show, is he's agreed with the idea that, yeah, it is very hard for those 5 offensive linemen to gel a lot of times. So I was really impressed to see how they just, no matter what happened, no matter who got shuffled around, who went down, who came in, whoever it was, they just found a way to just stay really solid. And I think give Jade Mayava a lot of good pass protection. So it's just really, I'm impressed to see this group all year. Like I said, I really was only critical of Reed that first time, but then been impressed how he's gelled with that group. And a lot of credit does go to Zach Hansen for really, keeping those guys ready and having them ready for whatever got thrown at them.
Well, comment here from Social Studies guy. Priority 1, hit the weight room. I bring up this comment for multiple reasons. One is Trumaine Carroll, and we talked about this on last week's Tuesday show, that Trumaine Carroll came aboard in the spring. So it's not as though he could have set in place his full program. I mean, obviously he got the fundamentals, he got the basic principles and ideas, conveying them to his players. But in terms of transforming these bodies into the kinds of bodies that Trumaine Carroll wants, you don't get that in a couple months. He needs this full off-season cycle at USC. And that is one definite reason for optimism going into 2026. We get Trumaine Carroll with a full cycle with the returning players. They can really absorb his methods. Crash, you mentioned last week on our Tuesday show that the strength coach is the coach that probably spends the most time with all the players, in terms of the daily work in the weight room. So that's really encouraging. But I also mentioned Social Studies guy's point about the weight room because this offensive line held up even without having the benefit of that full 1-year cycle under Trumaine Carroll. So this line didn't really have a chance to fully implement Trumaine Carroll's strength plan. And yet because Zach Hansen was such a rock star, the best assistant coach on this staff, bar none, in 2025, again, the floor was really high for this group. And now with a full off season for those who are coming back next year, Trumaine Carroll can really raise the ceiling, but the floor is really high. So that's why I mentioned Social Studies guy's point about the weight room, because Trumaine Carroll can now take this floor that's been established in 2025, and he can now pursue a much higher ceiling in 2026. All right, so continuing with our look at the USC offense. Now, one of the big stories, Mekhi Lemon, Jacoby Lane, sidelined in the first quarter for disciplinary reasons. How did you think the backups played? How did you think the backups responded to this situation? And we'll get to Mekhi Lemon in a minute, but how did you rate the backups in this game, being thrown into the fire? And they probably weren't expecting this. So how did they do in this adjusted last-minute type of situation?
Well, I think it was definitely, they struggled a bit. Obviously, the USC did strike first and get that early touchdown. But then kind of after that, it seemed like it was kind of a bit slow. Kind of they struggled a bit. And then I think kind of once Lemon and Lane got back in, that's part of what helped the offense slowly start to get rolling again. But I think for that first part, and I don't even want to say, I don't know what the disciplinary suspension was about. But I do think, especially considering an opponent of UCLA's caliber, I think was a good opportunity for them to get reps, especially considering Lemon is probably off to the NFL next year, and Lane could very well follow him too. So I think it was honestly meaningful for those guys to get those reps, because then it just helps them get more comfortable in the system next year, especially if Jade Mayava does return.
All right, and the running game, King Miller, man, this guy finished the race. This guy carried it through. It's not as though he just splashed onto the scene against Michigan in mid-October. This guy continued to deliver for USC. Really impressive what he did. And, obviously the offensive line has to contribute to this, but, King Miller is still making significant contributions to this team. Like, he did it from the start, and he carried it through to the end against UCLA.
Absolutely, Matt. I mean, you've just seen how he's been ever since he got it. Even when he just got reps against, Missouri State, he was super electrifying and exciting. Obviously, we weren't sure how it would translate when he got thrown in against Michigan and then just had to play the rest of the year as the RB1. But it's been really fun and just exciting to watch him, especially with like what he can do next year, especially if, USC does get Wayman Jordan back and are able to, pair them. Like, that can be a really dynamic running back room right there. And then especially, I'm not sure if Brian Jackson comes back too. I'm not sure exactly what he's looking at. I wouldn't be surprised if he transfers, just given kind of how he kind of, even after coming, Jordan and Eli Sanders went out injured, he could possibly want to look for a fresh start. But it's just really impressive to see just King Miller just get the job done and just run the dang ball.
All right, let's now talk about Makai Lemon and talking about the Biletnikoff Award. Now, Lemon did come up with a big touchdown catch. He also came up with a big kick return as well. So we made a couple notable splash plays in the second half. Now, Jeremiah Smith of Ohio State, Lemon's main competitor for the Biletnikoff, he came up with one touchdown against Michigan, but that was a slugfest in the snow. It was mostly Ohio State with a ball control running game. I mean, Smith made that one real high-profile catch. Not a whole lot else. How would you size up the Biletnikoff race? And keeping in mind that Jeremiah Smith gets that extra national television spotlight in the Big Ten championship game against Indiana this coming Saturday.
Well, I think we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, Matt. Jeremiah Smith had the advantage of playing in a much higher profile game. Both College Game Day and Big Noon Kickoff were there. All the hype was there. Everyone was like hyped up for me. And hell, I even watched for a few minutes of it. And just the way they just introed the game with Billy Bob Thornton from Landman, which, I'm going to watch after we're done tonight. But still, just, the fact that they get him and just create this big storyline just around the game in general, and then to see what he did just really, I think, helps his narrative. And then you also talk about, he's going to get to play in another high-profile game against Indiana in the Big Ten championship next week. But obviously, Makai Lemon, he probably didn't help that he had to serve a one-quarter suspension. But then still, when he got in, he did definitely, I thought he played well, was able to, really help USC. But still, I think Lemon should win, but he definitely, kind of the circumstances over these last couple of weeks aren't exactly helping his cause, given just the kind of platform that Jeremiah Smith has been getting during that same time frame.
You mentioned the quarterback room for USC, that whether it's Maava or Longstreet next year, USC should be in pretty good hands. But let's tackle that question a little bit more coming out of this UCLA game. I mean, if it is Maava, you're getting a guy who has now had a full season under his belt. He played a little bit at UNLV, dipped his toes a little bit in the water late last season, a few games and then a bowl game. But now he's gone through a full season. So if it's Maava next year, and obviously we're not predicting what's going to happen, that we have 8.5 months for that. But just, if it's Maava, you get the benefit of someone who's had a lot of experience. But with Longstreet, you're banking on the upside. And really, Longstreet would be in the position that Maava was last year, sitting behind the number one, waiting for his chance, waiting for his turn. So, I don't think the UCLA game dramatically moved the needle. It really comes down to, what Maava thinks, what his advisors say, how he's sizing up his full situation. And we didn't get to see too much of Husan Longstreet, but what's your initial feeling? Because again, we're going to have many months to kick this one around, or however long this drama lasts, however uncertain it remains. But just what's your initial impression of Maava versus Longstreet in 2026 at USC?
Well, I think if Maava comes back, I would expect he'd start, and I think he will come back. But I think really just with Maava, you're going to just see a team that's kind of just going to, like you said, have that benefit of having a guy who's got the experience of now starting, not just having now done a full year at USC, but also his year at UNLV is really, I think, going to benefit him. And even the 4 games he had when he got thrown in after Miller Moss was benched, I think it's all going to benefit him. So I think USC would just be in more stable hands. And I think like what Jeff Rodriguez just said about Longstreet, I think, yes, Jeff, I fully agree. I think Longstreet probably does have a higher ceiling. But yeah, he's like, maybe a first-year starter. And I mean, I'm not to say that he doesn't deserve his chance at some point. It's just, I think he might have to wait another year. But I think also, like, look around the country this year at all the first-time starters who either struggled or didn't live up to the billing. I mean, especially Arch Manning comes to mind in that regard. And I'm not saying, like, Arch isn't a bad quarterback, but it definitely took him some time to get going. And, I mean, Texas is now, like, because of that, they're now really trying to now really have to push for their case to make the college football playoff. So I think really it just, with Mayavi, you're going to get guaranteed experience as a starter, and you know what you're going to get. Not that I'm confident he'll continue to improve, but Longstreet, it could maybe be definitely a bit of a learning curve in those first few games if he takes over the starting job next year.
Plenty more to come, folks, here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. But first, a word from our sponsor. We'll see you in 1 minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And, of course, you can watch Mark Rogers and his national show here at the Voice of College Football 6 nights a week, Monday through Saturday, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and in the rest of the West. And, hey, like, this is Conference Championship Week leading to Selection Sunday. Next Sunday, I think Mark will probably have a Sunday special show after the playoff field and the bowls are announced. So, like, this is the – like, if there's 1 week that you want to be watching Mark Rogers and the national shows here at the Voice of College Football, it's this week. So do pay attention to Mark Rogers. Now, as we continue with our show, want to mention something we referenced a little bit earlier that Crash, Ethan, and myself talked to USC's Cody Kessler. So you see this on the screen on the USC homepage at the Voice of College Football. See where the cursor is, and you see that word bonus. So that's the bonus cut. That's for members only. We have a 15.5-minute free segment. Cody Kessler talks about his USC career. That's free. That's for everyone. But we put another 17.5-minute segment behind the paywall. That's the bonus cut. So on the homepage, you click that join button, and you get the pop-up. Join at the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier. You got the exclusive insider access to the bonus cuts. Bring your fork and knife here to the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. Those memberships help support our channel. They support myself, Ethan, and Crash Lake Collier. So do become a member and enjoy the full 33 minutes with Cody Kessler. If you can't afford a membership, though, 15.5 minutes of that 33-minute conversation are free. It was a pleasure to Cody Kessler. We thank him for his time. It was a heck of a lot of fun talking ball and USC with Cody Kessler. All right, Crash. So, we've talked about the UCLA game. It was a pretty unremarkable game. USC wins 29-10 over a bad UCLA team. In terms of UCLA, UCLA has a coaching search, and I would think that, USC just has to get its own house in order, make the improvements that we've been talking about, fire Rob Ryan, get a new special teams coach, as well. Full off season with Tremaine Carroll. Like if USC does that, UCLA should not be a problem. Nevertheless, it is a point of interest. It is a point of local intrigue. Who's UCLA going to get? Any general thoughts on the UCLA head coaching search at this point in time?
I've kind of wondered. It seems like the reports I've been seeing seems like they're targeting James Madison's Bob Chesney, which I think is a smart hire, especially given that James Madison really seems to just hire good coaches. Like they have a coach leave, they get another guy. They got Kurt Signetti. Look where he's doing. Indiana. Bob Chesney, I think, could do a great job. Obviously, I think there are more complications with UCLA, and I'm not even talking about so much just on the field, but it's like, what's the deal with Martin Jarmond? Fans and alums don't seem to be very happy with him and the search he's conducting, the job he's generally done during his tenure at UCLA, especially when it comes to the football team. And then also, I think you do have to factor in where are you playing next year, and then there's the lawsuit with the Rose Bowl in the city of Pasadena. So there's definitely just a lot of just challenges to this job that I'm wondering could maybe, maybe get some candidates to, want to shy away, especially if even if you are a head coach at a top group of 5 school where you're going to have resources where you'll be in a position where you're competing for that group of 5 spot in the college football playoff every year. I feel most coordinators might be more inclined to just get that first head coaching experience, but then so I'd feel like maybe coordinators, but then the other name I keep wondering would go is the New Mexico coach, Jason Eck. Even though he's only there for 1 year, Eck trounced UCLA at the Rose Bowl and ultimately was the final straw for Deshaun Foster. And I know people are saying, oh, maybe Martin Jarmond should have fired Foster, and then right after the handshake, handed Eck a contract right there and then. And if you look at what Eck did at Idaho and turned that program around, he's done a good job everywhere he's been since he started his coaching career. So that's one. And I know I asked about it earlier in the year, and a Lobos fan's like, oh, I don't. I'm like, dude, his name's been connected ever since that game. So those are 2 names that I'm kind of following to see, like, not just obviously for the UCLA job, but kind of any of these other jobs that are starting to open up, especially now that Lane Kiffin has officially moved on to LSU.
Yeah, Jason Eck wins 9 games with New Mexico this season. If you win 9 games at New Mexico, you're pretty good at your job. You know how to coach ball. That would be really interesting. A note on Bob Chesney and James Madison. Now, this is one of the big plot twists in college football right now. The college football playoff gives automatic berths to the 5, and here's the key term, the 5 highest ranked conference champions. Now, why do I say that? 5 highest ranked. We assume that the power conferences, including the ACC, are going to be among the 5 highest ranked conference champions. But here's the wrinkle. If 5 lost Duke is 7-5 and is playing in the ACC championship game against Virginia because of ACC tiebreakers. If Duke wins the ACC championship, beats Virginia this coming Saturday, Duke will not be one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions. And guess who's going to get in over Duke if Duke wins? Yes, James Madison with Bob Chesney is in position with a win in the Sun Belt title game. James Madison would join the North Texas Tulane winner in the playoff. What a completely unforeseen set of circumstances. But now it's possible with Duke against Virginia. The ACC is praying for Virginia to win that game. But anyway, if Duke does win and James Madison wins this weekend as well, James Madison is in the playoff. And so that could scuttle UCLA's bid to get Bob Chesney from James Madison as possibly the next Kurt Signetti. So that is something to watch for. So like if you don't want Bob Chesney to come to UCLA, you need to be rooting for the Duke football team against Virginia. Like these intersections, never could have seen it coming, but that's what we are looking at this coming weekend. All right, so moving off the UC, well, actually one more item for the UCLA coaching search. Jonathan Smith gets fired by Michigan State, another Big Ten school today. Jonathan Smith, as a UCLA head coach, He's coached against USC a few times. Crash, what would you think about Jonathan Smith if he comes to Westwood?
I think that what hire would make sense. And I think Smith might be having trouble. If he wants to remain a head coach, he's going to probably have trouble finding a good job. Whereas I think UCLA and the pairing works pretty well given he's from Pasadena. And so he knows just that area. He grew up going to USC games, but he knows the LA area. Obviously being a West Coast lifer until he went to Michigan State, he knows the whole West Coast pretty well. So I could see him fitting in there pretty well. So I think he'd be an interesting candidate there. And I think he probably would do better. But then obviously a lot of it does hinge on what is the administration's commitment to football, like a social studies guy is putting on commented. So I think that really until UCLA kind of figures out what they want to be, it's like, you're absolutely right, social studies. Yeah, it's like it's going to be a grind no matter who you put in there. And it's going to be a struggle. And possibly the coach will get fired anyways. So I think Smith would be an interesting name that makes sense, but at the same time, it could be a struggle for him. But I think I could see him taking that job if he were offered.
Yeah, and UCLA needs to figure out its football operations more than where it plays its home games. Like the Bruins do not have their priorities in the right order. But hey, Bruins, if you want to continue to not be good, I don't think people at USC are really going to mind. They're not really going to lose any sleep on that particular point. Bob Springer mentions New Mexico had 72 portal transfers on their team, so like that's a Signetti-like formula. Lots of portal additions. Basically importing a roster, not even being critical. Like it worked for Jason Eck, it worked for Kurt Signetti. So it certainly is a sign of how skilled Jason Eck is at his job. All right, Crash, we're going to do a bonus cut on the coaching carousel, but we're going to keep our carousel items on this live show to the West and to the Big Ten. So let's keep it in the Big Ten. So Jonathan Smith out, Pat Fitzgerald, former Northwestern head coach, lots of Big Ten experience, goes to East Lansing. Crash, size up Pat Fitzgerald to Michigan State.
I think this one makes sense, especially now that, Fitzgerald has gotten through the lawsuit, and he said it himself. He says he feels vindicated now that he's gotten through it, was able to settle with Northwestern for just over the whole hazing scandal there. But pretty much, I think it makes sense because he knows the Big Ten, and then he also just Michigan State's been struggling, and obviously Northwestern's a place that can be tough to win. But I still think he's had some respectable seasons even at Northwestern. So I think with that, it's really just you look at how he's done. He's obviously had he's had 2 10-win seasons, got 9 8 wins as well, number of times. And I think so. I think he can fit. But the thing is, Michigan State seems like they want to win. They're not going to settle for being like, what was it, 4-8 this year? Whatever they've been going under Jonathan Smith, they don't want to be there. They want to be kind of where they were under Mel Tucker before that whole thing kind of fell apart over Tucker's whole sexual misconduct scandal or sexual harassment scandal.
Yeah. Okay. Staying in the Big Ten, and we're not just talking about firings. We're also talking about retentions. Schools that could have fired a coach but didn't. People were saying, well, Luke Fickell's really turned things around at Wisconsin. Oh, it looks like that move was really good. Splat. Wisconsin loses to Minnesota, loses Paul Bunyan's axe to PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers. So, that Luke Fickell move, I'm not feeling it. The thing about Wisconsin, Crash, as and a lot of people who watch this show know, and people who are just diehard college football fans know the sport inside and out. Wisconsin was the place where any coach could win 9 games. Gary Anderson won 9 games. Paul Christ was a pretty consistent winner. Like, these guys have not done a whole lot in their careers outside Wisconsin, but they came to Madison and they won. Brett Bielema is doing an okay job at Illinois, and he's not doing a bad job, but he was making Rose Bowls at Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a place where Brett Bielema had his greatest successes as a college football coach. Those successes were not matched in Bielema's subsequent coaching stops at Arkansas and now at Illinois. This season was a failure for Illinois. Illinois wanted to do what Indiana did a year ago. The Illini beat USC, but they didn't really do that well as a whole. But the point is, Wisconsin was a place where lots of less than superstar coaches could win 9 games. And Luke Fickell took that Wisconsin brand, a very robust brand, a very successful brand, a very proven brand, and he's been bad. He hasn't been average. He's been bad. Let's just call it for what it is. Crash, your opinion on Wisconsin choosing to retain Luke Fickell going into 2026?
Well, Matt, I think obviously there is the buyout, but even putting that aside, as we've just seen happen all across the country this year. But I think part of why Wisconsin might also, money aside, be opting to keep Fickell, I think it more have to do with the fact that they don't want to enter this crazy coaching market this year. Are you better off? I think schools, I won't mention them. We'll talk about it more, obviously, when we do our bonus cut on it. Schools, there are a handful of schools out there, Wisconsin included, that are thinking, all right, a lot of the big players went this year. Maybe we sit this year out, and then if things still go bad, we fire our coach then, and then we'll hopefully, if especially if you're a top brand, you'll be able to have a better pick of who you want rather than trying to fight this market, especially with some of the top candidates either going places or signing extensions where they're currently at. So I think that must be, I think that has to factor into why Wisconsin is and others are opting to wait, even in the face of, really poor results and poor performance like the Badgers have done in the last couple of years under Fickell.
All right, our coaching carousel conversation continues because, this is Carousel Sunday, hirings, firings, it's all happening. It's like, what the NFL is going to be in early January on Black Monday after Week 18. Well, today's the equivalent day in college football. So again, Crash, myself, and Ethan, we're going to do a bonus cut, fork and knife, on the full Monty, the whole enchilada. But here on our live show, we're going to give you our insights on the Big Ten and the West. Continuing the Big Ten, Crash. Penn State, a very conspicuous open job. You have Lane Kiffin going to LSU. That seat's filled. You have Alex Golish going to Auburn. That seat's filled. Got John Sumrall going to Florida. That seat's filled. The SEC seats on the plane are getting filled. Penn State's not. What's going on here, Crash? What do you think's happening behind the scenes? What do you think the maneuvers are? What are the whispers? What's the scuttlebutt? Where do you think this thing is going in Happy Valley?
I've been reading up on this, Matt. I've been very interested ever since I've seen Penn State players publicly lobbying for them to hire Terry Smith full time. And I think it's like, they lost 3 games after Franklin. They lost 3 more games after they fired Franklin. But I think Smith was able to get those guys playing and motivate them. And I think he seems like a guy, like from what I've seen, he seems like a good guy. Players respond well to him. And I think he definitely at least deserves consideration for the job. But I'm wondering if you do fire a guy like James Franklin, I think I saw Adam Brenneman talk about it. You don't fire a guy like James Franklin, who he had his 4-21 against the AP top 10. Like, I'm not trying to say that is what it is, but you don't fire a guy who's done what James Franklin said, especially considering where the Nittany Lions were before Franklin took over the program, to just, to settle, I guess, for lack of a better word, and go for like a top group of 5 coach. That said, though, that could be the move, not to mention it's also a lot more, financially savvy. And especially it's what I think about when everyone now says, oh, we want our coach, we want him well compensated, but we don't want to overpay too early. So the group of 5 coach, it's like you get them on the cheap, but it's like they're often you're getting these winners. So I'm wondering, is that a good option too? Obviously, though, I'm going to guess Penn State could possibly drop a bombshell on this that we're just not even thinking of, because everyone is just been for the last few weeks. Just it's been Lane Kiffin. Where's he going to go? So Penn State, and wonder if they're just using the fact that Lane Kiffin's been taking all the oxygen, especially, I mean, we saw with the whole Marty Smith thing. I mean, you saw those memes. Just if they've just been able to work in the shadows and use that to just quietly contact candidates who they're interested in. So I'm like curious, do they drop a bombshell because they've just been working in the shadows as a result of the whole Kiffin saga?
It really is fascinating. I'm just passing things along here. I'm not making any predictions. I'm not getting out my crystal ball. I'm just passing this note along, okay? It's filed in that category. It's not kind of a prediction or a sign or an indicator, just passing this along. I've seen BYU fans talking about what if Kalani Sitake goes to Penn State. I've just seen chatter. Doesn't mean anything's happening, but I'm just saying. I'm seeing BYU fans on social media talking about that. And, of course, the other name that is gone under the radar because of his very messy divorce from LSU, Brian Kelly. Is Penn State the place where Brian Kelly makes his comeback as a coach? Going to be very interesting. All right, so continuing with our Big Ten Coaching Carousel Evaluation Series. Crash, you're named Crash. One program is crashing and burning in the carousel, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You know, they re-upped with Matt Rule, put all their chips in the middle of the table, and he's not just losing. He's getting buried. He's getting bludgeoned. He's getting blown the heck out week after week after week. Allow 37 to Penn State. Allow 40 to Iowa at home. Oh, my God. This is a disaster.
Yeah, Matt. Well, I think it was really interesting. I mean, the Nebraska, the Rule to Penn State connection does make sense, given he's friends with Pat Kraft and he went to Penn State. He's an alum. Like, it does. I mean, and that is often part of what ties it. And I mean, the thing was, Nebraska was hot. And what's the motto they always say? Strike when the iron's hot. And I think Rule and his agent, I'm not trying to say that, we're, being like, all right, let's go smoke a cigar and celebrate. And who cares what happens with the Huskers from here on out? I'm not saying they're doing that. But I think when he got that extension, I think it was just he was proactive. I think just Nebraska like, all right, we trust this guy. But then it's like, the thing is, I'm going to have to assume that Troy Dannon might be kicking himself a little bit because Matt Rule's has definitely cooled down a bit. So it's like, would he have ended up leaving anyways, given that I know we always talk about in the moment, especially if, candidates are hot and that's what leads schools to act. But would you have been better off maybe waiting a few weeks? Because the thing is, your coach probably isn't going to leave until after you've played your final game of the season. So of the regular season. So wouldn't you have been better off maybe waiting a few weeks and just being like, all right, let's just see maybe a couple more weeks. Okay, now we do it. Maybe you do it then. Either if they keep winning, then you really do it when it's like they'll end up with a really good record, even if they don't make the playoffs, or they fizzle out a little bit and then Penn State's not going to be calling. So I think that was kind of a bit of a misfire by Nebraska for kind of thinking, okay, great, we're worried, but why don't we wait this out a few more weeks and see what actually happens? See if he's still, see if, Penn State's still calling his phone in about a month's time.
And this is the thing that kills me about athletic directors and schools. When they hire coaches, how they handle coaches, and in this case, how Nebraska retained Matt Rule and re-upped with him. Why don't you give compensation based on achievement? Like, these contracts are so out of control. These buyout numbers are so out of proportion relative to what these coaches are accomplishing. You should have a modest base pay structure, and you load up your contract with incentives. Like, as an athletic director, you should be saying, okay, look, if you win big, if you hit these targets, if you reach these benchmarks that we have for our program, we will give you Fort Knox, because you will have earned it, right? But we're not going to give you all this guaranteed upfront money. We'll take care of you. You're not going to be, a homeless guy on the street, but the money should be tied to incentives and achievements. And so, the idea of, oh, well, we have to keep Matt Rule at Nebraska. What had he done? Right? Like, why are you pushing all your chips in the middle of the table for a guy who hasn't done jack squat? That's the thing that kills me about this. And so athletic directors should be saying, we will give you the world. We will give you the earth if you win a conference championship, if you make the playoff, if you're playing in a prestigious New Year's Day bowl game. But we're not going to give you just, this ungodly sum of guaranteed upfront money. No, you have to achieve something to earn something. That's how these things should be done. And people will say, well, you're not going to get the top candidates. Fine. Look at Indiana with Curt Cignetti, right? Like they didn't, give the whole kingdom to Curt Cignetti right away, but then he won big, and now he's getting the gold rush. He's getting the gold mine. That's how it's supposed to work, and that should be the new model. And yet it seems as though so many athletic directors are afraid of losing coaches either in their initial courtships or in terms of retention, but without the coach having really proven himself at that institution at a really high level. It's a really conspicuous flaw in the business model in college football and coach hiring. But definitely it's part of what happened at Nebraska with Matt Rule. The first rule of Fight Club, well, he's getting knocked out. That's the first rule of Fight Club in Nebraska. So, as we continue with our coaching carousel series, moving to, one more Big Ten example before we go to the West. Sharon Moore. And I saw a tweet from a Michigan journalist saying that Michigan's 9-3 this year felt very hollow. Not a lot of wins over ranked teams. Kind of some parallels with USC, right? 9-3 looks really good on paper, but you missed the playoff. You don't get you didn't play the toughest Big Ten schedule. Like Michigan did not play Oregon or Indiana. Did play Ohio State, but did not play Oregon or Indiana. And of course, USC kicked Michigan up and down the field. Crash, is Sharon Moore the guy at Michigan? Is he really the guy fit to be Jim Harbaugh's successor? I mean, he is Harbaugh's successor, but like, is he a fit for that role? Is he good enough right now to have Michigan, competing at an elite level? Because there was a great distance between Ohio State and Michigan on Saturday.
Well, Matt, I think you got to look at, obviously, he did have to take over in a tough situation, and they are kind of still reeling through some of the scandals. Moore's going to have to serve a one game suspension next year as for the whole sign stealing thing with Colin Stalions. But I think at the same time, Michigan lost the three biggest games on their schedule this year. They lost to Oklahoma, they lost to USC, and of course they lost the game to Ohio State. So you do have to wonder, can Sharon Moore win the big games? Granted, he has beaten Ryan Day in Ohio State twice, once as acting head coach, then last year, obviously, and basically, basically forced Ryan Day to hire security. So it's like he's been able to beat Ohio State. He's won the big one. You do have to give him that, but this year he didn't. Obviously, you got to look at Ohio State's talent, and they're absolutely loaded. But I do think it's interesting. Like, I think he's got that program. It seems like they were 9-4 last year. They hit 9 wins again. So it's definitely not bad, but it's like the question is going into year 3, and especially once they get fully through the penalties handed down by the NCAA, is can he sustain that? Can he take that next step? Can he get to 10 wins? Can he make the playoffs? He had an opportunity this weekend and he couldn't capitalize on it. So I want to see, can he take that next step and hit double-digit wins next year? And I think if he can do that, I think he's got a shot to prove that he's the guy for Michigan. But if not, I'm gonna wonder, will Michigan be doomed to just having nice 8-9 win seasons? And which I know from having multiple friends who go to Michigan, is not the standard at the University of Michigan. The standard is like the standard at USC, hoisting a natty every year and beating your big rival.
Yeah. So Michigan and USC both going to 2026, really, really needing at least a 10-win season to think that everything is going in the right direction. So Lincoln Riley and Sharon Moore, both with a very similar challenge going into next year. All right, final item on our coaching carousel whip around. Again, we'll have a bonus cut, fork and knife, on the full national picture pretty soon, during carousel week. It's really spinning rapidly right now, so we'll do a bonus segment for you. But continuing our series, we've done the Big Ten. Now let's just wrap up our show with a little brief look at the West. We've talked about UCLA. Stanford hiring Tabitha Pritchard, Andrew Luck's buddy, played at Stanford, coached at Stanford. So Andrew Luck goes with a very in-house buddy type hire. And Oregon State with Jamarcus Shepard, a really off-the-radar pick, an Alabama assistant coach, young guy, someone who's going to get a lot of time to learn and grow on the job. But Oregon State clearly wanted to go young, and it wanted to go SEC with its hire. And then, of course, Cal. Cal is vacant. We can talk about what coaches make sense in Berkeley. So Stanford with Pritchard, Oregon State with Shepard, and Cal, the vacancy in the ongoing search conducted by general manager and former Super Bowl coach Ron Rivera. Crash, anything on Stanford, Oregon State, or Cal?
So I think with Stanford, it's certainly interesting when you look at Pritchard. Obviously started his career at Stanford, but he's been in the NFL for the last few years. But he definitely knows the college coaching landscape. Obviously, it's changed in the 3 years he was with Washington. But I think it's definitely I think it's an interesting hire. And I think Andrew Luck, kind of from the start since he got there, he seems like the people he wants to work with in that football program are people who went to Stanford and care about Stanford. It seems to me like the direction that he's going. And I think that's a smart direction, especially because of some of the unique academic challenges. But I think one thing that helps Luck out as general manager and as, basically essentially the athletic director of the football program, given he gets to make those hires, is the fact that Jonathan Levin, the new president at Stanford, is very much committed to football. So I think for that reason, Levin is also a Stanford alum as well. So I think that having all those Stanford connections, I think they know all right, we need someone who actually gets this place and can then figure out how can we get the key transfers that are going to allow us to compete at the top of the ACC, compete in the CFP, compete for championships. So I think it's a smart hire there. Oregon State with Jamarcus Shepard, I like that they get, the young, energetic, relatable guy who's also really built up a reputation as a recruiter. I've been following this one a lot from just reading John Canzano a bunch. He's obviously talked a lot about Oregon State. I mean, he had one crazy idea of what if you just demote Trent Bray back to DC, which I don't think you can do. But obviously, I think Shepard, as long as he just doesn't have just the faceplant that Trent Bray and the Beavers had this year, I think he's going to get plenty of time. But that said, though, there are expectations. Oregon State wants to compete at the top of the Pac-12 and really position themselves for whatever comes next to make the cut if there is that super league that everybody talks about for them. So I think really it's a critical hire. And I think Oregon State made a really smart choice with it. Obviously, time will tell. And as for Cal, I'm interested to see what happens there. I mean, Ron Rivera has stated that the standard at Cal has to be 8 to 9 wins. No more just, we look at us. We made it to, the LA Bowl or the Sun Bowl or, everything's great. Same thing there. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if they go with a Cal alum. And one that pops up to mind is Tosh Lapoy, the current defensive coordinator at Oregon. That's been the name John Canzano has talked a lot about in his columns. And so I think that's definitely one where I think he'll probably get an interview. I wouldn't be surprised they hire him. And I wonder, does Rivera sort of follow the same model that Andrew Luck has, where you've also got Rich Lyons, your chancellor at Cal, as an alum who knows and gets football and is committed to it. Rivera is a Cal alum and basically gets also to make the call on the football program. So I wonder, does he want to bring in someone, even if they don't have head coaching experience, that knows and gets Cal and is able to, and is committed, using the transfer portal to get the key players. So I think I'm really interested to see if they go Tosh Lapoy or whoever else they go, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rivera looks for someone who's got deep ties to the University of California.
All right, folks. So, this is our last Sunday post-game show. We thank you for watching all these Sunday shows during the season. So now we come at you once a week every Tuesday. That's our home, 7 p.m. in the West, 10 p.m. in the East. So we're going to be back at you on Tuesday, and the discussion is going to be transfer portal, the roster for 2026. Who's in, who's out, who does USC really need to retain? We hope that Ethan is going to be here. We hope that Ethan, if you're watching, feel better. Say some prayers for Ethan as he he's under the weather. Hope you get better, Ethan. But if he's here on Tuesday, it's going to be, we're going to look ahead to the 2026 USC roster. I'll also look at more coaching carousel intrigues, but we're going to do a bonus cut eventually on the national coaching carousel picture. So like we transition into off-season mode, and of course, we'll know USC's bowl destination in a little over a week. So obviously the following Tuesday show, not this coming one, but the following Tuesday, we will be able to get a first look at USC's bowl opponent and destination. So that's coming down the line. But Tuesday night, we shift into off-season mode, and we look ahead to the future of USC football in 2026. And a reminder, we talked to Cody Kessler. We have a 15-minute segment that's free. We have a 17-minute segment that's a bonus cut, and it's right on our USC homepage on YouTube at the Voice of College Football. You'll see the free video just with a normal title. You'll see the members-only video marked bonus. So that's the bonus cut. If you become a member at the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier, you get the access to the full Cody Kessler interview, the whole 33 minutes, not just 15. But there is that one free segment which we wanted to offer for everybody, not behind a paywall. But becoming a member, going to vocfb.com/shop and getting USC merch, caps, t-shirts, coffee mugs, tumblers, whatever. The proceeds support the company, and they support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. So for Crash the Collier, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for being such a loyal audience on Sundays during the season. We're continuing the party on Tuesday as we look forward to 2026. Fight on, everybody.